Welcome to Revolution Chronicles. If you enjoy powerful, untold stories from America's past, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss a new episode. Tonight's story takes us back to 1999, when a small-town waitress vanished after answering a call from unknown. For 25 years, her family searched for answers until a box of old voicemail tapes revealed the chilling truth. This is the disappearance nobody could solve. Asterisk, it was the summer of 1999. America felt like it was standing at the edge of two worlds: the fading light of the old century and the uncertain dawn of the new millennium. Families were still gathering around kitchen tables, with the smell of Folgers brewing in the morning, but the internet was quietly creeping into everyday life. Dial-up tones echoed in living rooms, and cell phones were just beginning to slip into the hands of ordinary people. Though most folks still clung to landlines fixed to the wall, in a small Midwestern town, the kind of place with a single blinking stoplight and a diner that kept the night shift alive, a young woman named Emily Carter was finishing her late shift. She was 23 years old, with soft brown hair often tied back in a loose ponytail, a tired smile that somehow still carried warmth, and the kind of resilience only small-town girls knew. The people who stopped into the diner at odd hours: truckers, factory workers, lonely old men looking for a cup of coffee, always noticed her. Not just because she was kind, but because she seemed to carry a quiet dream in her eyes, as if she was waiting for something better to arrive. That night, the jukebox by the corner was still playing old country songs, mostly Garth Brooks and a little Shania Twain. Cigarette smoke lingered near the back where the regulars sat, and outside the air was heavy with July heat. Emily worked her last tabala pair of farmers, arguing about corn prices, and leaned against the counter for a moment, wiping her forehead with the back of her hand. She was tired, but it was the kind of tired that felt ordinary. Nothing about that night suggested it would become the last time anyone in town would see her alive when her shift ended just past midnight. She clocked out and stepped into the dark parking lot behind the diner. A few neon signs buzzed faintly against the quiet night. Her old Chevy Cavalier was parked beneath a single street lamp, its paint chipping, its tires showing wear. She dug through her purse for the keys, when suddenly the phone in her bag began to ring. Now, 1999, cell phones weren't what they are today. Most people still relied on home answering machines with blinking red lights. But Emily had been given a simple Nokia by her older brother, who worried about her working late nights. It was clunky, the kind of phone you could drop and it would still keep working. Calls were expensive, and most people didn't waste minutes unless it was important. The screen lit up. The word unknown blinked back at her. She froze. It was unusual in those days to get an anonymous call on a cell phone. Telemarketers rarely reached them, and prank calls usually happened on landlines. Something about it made her uneasy, but against her better judgment. She answered. No one knows what was said on the other end. Some claim she looked startled. Others remembered she seemed pale when she slid into her car moments later. But what we do know is that Emily never made it home that night. The next morning, her mother noticed the house was unusually quiet. Emily always came home late, sometimes slipping into the kitchen for leftovers or a glass of milk before bed. The family's answering machine held no messages. Her bed was untouched, sheets still neatly folded. The Cavalier was nowhere in the driveway. At first, her mother told herself Emily must have gone to stay with a friend after work. But by noon, panic began to set in. Emily was not the kind of girl who disappeared without telling anyone. By evening, the police were called. A missing persons report was filed. The town was small, the kind of place where people noticed when a neighbor's dog went missing, so word spread fast. Posters were stapled to telephone poles. The diner regulars swore they'd seen her leave around midnight. A farmer claimed he noticed her headlights trailing off toward the highway, though he wasn't sure. And then nothing. Days passed, and then weeks. The local police scoured nearby fields, ditches, and abandoned barns. Volunteers from the town walked shoulder to shoulder through tall grass with flashlights in hand. Rivers were searched, bridges checked, rest stops investigated. Her car was gone, her phone silent, her bank account untouched. There was no sign of struggle, no trace of blood. No note left behind. The only thread investigators had was that mysterious phone call. Unknown. The record showed a call placed to Emily's phone at 12:07 a.m., just minutes after she clocked out. The call lasted 45 seconds. Then silence. In 1999, tracing an unknown number was far more difficult than today. Caller ID was new, and privacy protections meant not every call could be easily tracked. The police requested logs from the carrier, but technical limitations and missing data left them frustrated. Whoever called her either blocked their number or used something more sophisticated than anyone expected. As summer turned to fall, the case grew colder. The posters faded on the telephone poles, the ink bleeding from rain. The diner hung a small picture of Emily near the register with the words "still missing" scrawled underneath. Her mother, who once baked pies for church gatherings, stopped attending Sunday service. Unable to sit through sermons while her daughter's chair at the kitchen table remained empty, and yet, through the sorrow, whispers grew. Some said Emily had planned her own escape, that she was tired of the small town and ran off with a man she secretly loved. Others claimed she must have owed someone money, though no one could ever prove it. And then there were darker rumors that the caller had been someone from town, someone she trusted, someone who knew she would pick up the phone. But the truth, whatever it was, remained buried. Years slipped by. Technology changed. The new century marched forward. By the time the early 2000s brought reality TV and 9/11s shook the country, Emily's name was little more than a memory whispered by those who once drank coffee at her tables. The case file sat gathering dust in a police department drawer. It might have ended there, forgotten. But 25 years later, long after most had given up hope, a discovery pulled the story back into the light, hidden in a cardboard box in the attic of Emily's childhood home. Her younger brother stumbled upon something unexpected. Old cassette tapes, dozens of them. At first, he thought they were just blank tapes they used to record songs off the radio back in the 90s, but written in faded ink across several of them were the words, "voicemail." He remembered suddenly that Emily's old cell phone had been set to forward unanswered calls to the family's landline. In 1999, the family's answering machine used tapes. Each time someone left a message, it would spool onto magnetic tape, preserved until someone erased it. And apparently, Emily had been saving them. Heart pounding, he carried the box down the creaking attic stairs. When he slid one of the tapes into the old machine still kept in the basement, the static crackled, followed by a familiar voice. It was Emily, laughing, saying she'd be home late, telling her mom not to wait up. Everyday things, echoes of a voice long gone. But then came one message, unlike the others. A voice that chilled the room. A message marked by silence, breathing, and words that even decades later made the hair on the back of the neck rise. And it was dated July 3, 1999, the night Emily vanished. The tape clicked and whirred, that old mechanical sound that belonged to another era. Emily's younger brother, Daniel, sat in the basement with the dust of the attic still on his shirt, his hands shaking slightly as the first message played. Her voice was so clear, so ordinary, so alive. "Hey, it's me. I'm just calling to say I'll be home after shift. Don't wait up, okay? Love you." Daniel sat back, his eyes stinging. He hadn't heard her voice in over 2 decades. and instant memories came flooding back, the way she hummed to herself while washing dishes, the way she teased him when he got into trouble at school, the way she seemed to hold the family together when their father left. For a moment, it was like she was in the room again. He played the next message. Another one of her, this time reminding her mother to pick up milk. Then one from a coworker at the diner. Another from an old boyfriend, checking if she wanted to meet up, each one a tiny fragment of a world that had long since vanished. But then came the tape dated July 3rd, 1999. The night everything changed. At first, it was only static. A faint hiss filled the room, broken by the occasional pop of the tape. Daniel leaned closer, straining to hear. Then came the sound of breathing. Slow, uneven. Not Emily's. A man's voice broke through. Low and distorted, as if he were whispering close to the phone's receiver. Emily. I told you, you shouldn't ignore me. The words sent a chill racing through Daniel's body. His hand hovered over the stop button, but he couldn't bring himself to press it. The voice continued. You think you can just walk away. Don't answer me, and then you pretend like I'm not here. You'll see. Tonight, you'll see. Tonight, you'll see. Then silence. Daniel sat frozen in his chair. Every sound in the basement amplified the faint hum of the refrigerator upstairs, the creak of the house settling. He knew he had stumbled on something far bigger than he understood. For 25 years, his family had lived in limbo. His mother had carried the grief like a wound that never healed, never knowing if Emily had suffered or if she had slipped away to some new life. But here, on a piece of magnetic tape forgotten in a box, was proof that Emily hadn't simply vanished. Someone had been calling her. Someone had been watching her. Daniel took the tapes to his mother. She sat at the kitchen table, the same one where Emily had once spread out her books and sketched in the margins of her notebooks. When the message played, her mother's face went pale, and she gripped the edge of the table as though the words themselves might knock her over. I knew it, she whispered. All these years, I knew someone had taken her for the family. The discovery was both a curse and a salvation. It tore open wounds they had learned to live with, yet it gave them something they hadn't had in decades: evidence. The tapes were turned over to the police, and soon the small town was buzzing again. Old wounds reopened. The case that had gathered dust was suddenly alive, and investigators who had long since retired were called back into the conversation. The first step was to digitize the recordings. Technology had advanced so far since 1999 that the static-filled whispers could now be run through software to clean up the noise. A forensic audio team worked for weeks, peeling back layers of distortion. When the enhanced version was finally revealed, the voice was clearer, still low, still menacing, but distinct enough to send shivers down the spine. Experts compared the voice to suspects from the original case files. There had been a few men questioned in 1999, an ex-boyfriend with a jealous streak, a customer at the diner who had once followed her home, even a drifter who had been seen in town that summer. But none of them had been charged. The enhanced tape, however, seemed to suggest a familiarity. The way the man said her name, the possessive tone, this wasn't a stranger calling at random. This was someone who knew Emily, someone who believed she had wronged him. Her brother Daniel, sitting with the investigators, clenched his fists as he listened. He could remember times when Emily would brush off strange phone calls at home, laughing nervously. Once, she had even mentioned that someone kept leaving hang-ups on the diner's line. But she never wanted to worry her mother, so she stayed quiet. In the hindsight of grief, these small moments felt like clues they had all missed. The discovery reignited the town's memory of Emily. People who had been young in 1999 were now middle-aged, raising children of their own. Many had moved away, but those who remained still remembered the girl who had disappeared. Suddenly, they were being interviewed again, asked to recall faces, names. Conversations from a quarter-century ago at the diner still standing. Though now under new ownership, the booths buzzed with talk. Some swore they remembered a man who used to linger near the counter late at night, always asking for Emily to refill his coffee. Others recalled seeing her upset a few days before she vanished, though no one could remember exactly why. Her mother, now frail and gray, sat on her porch every evening watching the sun set over the cornfields. Neighbors brought casseroles again, just like they had back in '99, as if the whole town had been transported back to that awful summer. The FBI was eventually brought in, their cold case unit interested in the possibility of new leads. They examined the phone records again, this time with modern tools that hadn't existed at the time. The unknown call that had reached Emily's cell phone at 12:07 a.m. was traced not to a blocked number, but to a now-defunct payphone, located outside a gas station 2 towns over. That detail changed everything. The payphone had long since been removed, the gas station replaced by a convenience store, but investigators dug into archived business records. Security footage from that night was gone. Technology back then didn't preserve tapes for long, but the payphone's existence tied the caller to a physical place. Someone had driven there. Someone had taken the time to call her, knowing she would answer. Then came the chilling realization. The voice on the tape hadn't just threatened her. It had promised action that very night. "You'll see. Tonight, you'll see." The message played again and again in the small police station. Investigators pacing the room. The words weren't just a threat. They were a timeline. Whoever had called Emily had already decided her fate. Daniel sat in silence, the weight of it crushing. For years, he had carried the guilt of being the younger brother who couldn't protect her. Now, hearing those words, he felt it more than ever. Yet, despite the chilling clarity of the tape, no one could name the voice with certainty. People were asked to listen, friends, co-workers, even old suspects, but memory is slippery, especially after so many years. Some swore it sounded like a jealous ex. Others said it reminded them of a local man who had once been questioned and released, but there was no consensus, no undeniable match. Still, the tapes reignited hope. They sparked news coverage across the region, then the nation. True crime shows picked up the story. Unsolved Mysteries-style podcasts dissected the tapes frame by frame, speculating about the man behind the whisper. For the family, it was a double-edged sword. The attention brought new leads, tips from strangers who claimed they knew something. Yet it also reopened the wound for her mother, who found herself answering reporters' questions on her front lawn. Her grief broadcast to the world. But deep down, there was a sense that maybe, just maybe, the truth was closer than ever. And then something extraordinary happened. While sifting through another tape, one that had been mislabeled in the box, Daniel found a message he hadn't heard before. It wasn't from the night Emily vanished, but from a week earlier. The tape clicked, and Emily's voice came through, rushed and nervous. "Hey, it's me. I don't know if I should even say this, but if anything happens, I think someone's following me. Don't tell Mom, she'll just worry. But just keep this, okay?" Then the message cut off. Daniel's heart stopped. He replayed it again and again. Emily had known. She had felt it. She had left behind a breadcrumb, a fragile warning preserved on magnetic tape for 25 years. And suddenly, the pieces began to fit together. The whispers in the diner, the late-night hang-ups, the uneasy laugh she used when someone asked if she was all right. Emily hadn't been imagining things. She hadn't run away. She had been living with the shadow of someone who refused to let her go. The question now wasn't whether Emily had been taken, The question was who and why. After all these years, that person had never been found. And so, the investigation pressed forward, each tape a fragile thread connecting the past to the present. With every word, every hiss of static, Emily's voice was speaking again, demanding the truth that had been buried for a quarter of a century. And the deeper investigators listened, the clearer it became. This was not the work of a stranger. This was personal. This was someone who had wanted her silenced. Someone who may have been closer than anyone ever imagined. The discovery of Emily's final message changed everything. That single voicemail, her own voice confessing that she thought someone was following her, was the kind of revelation that cracked open the fragile silence that had lain over the Clend town for 25 years to Daniel. It was like hearing her whisper from beyond the grave, reaching across time to leave a warning that no one had heard until now. For investigators, it was confirmation that her disappearance had never been an accident, never an impulsive runaway. Emily had been afraid, and she had been right to be, but afraid of who? The question hung heavy in every interview, in every news report, in every conversation whispered at the diner booths and church steps. In small towns, secrets don't vanish, they linger like smoke, drifting through the years, settling into quiet corners. And when the tapes resurfaced, so did those secrets. The police began revisiting the old case files, blowing dust off pages that had yellowed with age. Names written in black ink came alive again. Suspects once cleared brought back into focus. The first among them was Mark Jensen, Emily's boyfriend at the time of her disappearance. Mark had been older than Emily-20-7 to her 23. He was the kind of man people described as charming when he wanted to be, with an easy smile that could quickly sour into a sharp temper. He had grown up in town, worked off and on in construction, and spent more nights than anyone could count drinking beer at the edge of the diner counter, where Emily worked. In 1999, investigators had questioned him intensely. Mark admitted he and Emily had argued in the weeks before she vanished. He claimed she wanted to move away, to leave the small town and chase something bigger, while he was rooted in the soil of the county, unwilling to imagine life anywhere else. He swore he hadn't seen her that night, that he'd been with friends drinking. His alibi was shaky, but no evidence had tied him directly to her disappearance. Eventually, the trail had gone cold, and Mark faded back into town life. Now, listening to the enhanced tapes, investigators couldn't help but notice the similarities between his voice and the man who whispered those chilling words, "Emily, I told you, you shouldn't ignore me." But in the years since, Mark had changed. He had married, divorced, remarried. He'd taken over his father's small repair shop, his once rowdy youth buried under a body grown heavier, his face lined with age. When reporters asked him about the tapes, he grew defensive, his voice sharp. "I had nothing to do with Emily. Not then, not now. People need to let this go." Yet his anger only fueled the whispers. In a town where everyone knew everyone else's business, people began revisiting memories they had tried to forget. I remember him coming in one night, looking for her. One diner regular said. She told him she couldn't talk. She was working. He just sat there, staring at her like she was already gone. Others recalled hearing him on the phone outside, his voice raised, pacing near the streetlight. But Mark wasn't the only suspect. There was also Raymond Ray Thompson, a trucker who had been a late-night regular at the diner. Ray had the kind of presence that unsettled people, quiet, watchful, a man who seemed to linger too long over every word. In 1999, he was questioned after another waitress reported that he often asked about Emily's schedule, making comments that strayed beyond friendly. He was never charged with anything, but his name had been scribbled in the margins of the case file. When investigators tried to track him down now, they discovered he had passed away in 2011. But his family, when asked, admitted they remembered him talking about a girl at the diner years ago. One of his sons even confessed that he had found an old notebook among Ray's Things pages filled with names, dates, and strange notes about people in town. Emily's name was written there more than once. The revelation sent shivers through. Daniel? Could it have been Ray all along? Was the voice on the tape his, or had Ray been another shadow circling her, one of many men who saw her kindness as something they could own? The deeper investigators dug, the more unsettling the picture became. Emily, it seemed, had been surrounded by attention she had never asked for. To her family, she was simply their daughter. Their sister, the young woman with a tired smile, wiping down diner tables after midnight. But to others, she had become something else entirely, an object of obsession, a symbol of escape, a dream. They felt entitled to claim. The tapes now revealed that she had felt it. She had known. Her laughter at the hang-up calls, her nervous glances at the parking lot, her decision to accept that unknown call, it all came into sharper focus. She hadn't been naive. She had been living under the weight of fear, but trying not to let it show. In the fall of 2024, the FBI released a public appeal, asking anyone who had known Emily or who might recognize the voice on the tapes to come forward. For weeks, tips poured in. Some were cranks, some were long forgotten rumors. But among them were fragments of memory that, when pieced together, painted a haunting portrait of those final days. A former coworker at the diner remembered that Emily had once told her she thought someone was waiting for her in the parking lot after work. She said she saw the same truck parked across the street more than once. When I asked her who it was, she just shrugged and said, "Probably nothing." But I could tell it wasn't nothing. Another woman, who had lived near the Carter home in 1999, recalled hearing a man's voice shouting outside late one evening. It was summer, windows open, and I swear I heard someone calling her name in the dark. It wasn't a friendly call, it was angry, like he was daring her to answer. Each recollection pulled the town further back into that summer of 1999, as though the very air of the place had been waiting all these years to confess its secrets. For Emily's mother, it was torture. Each new detail was a knife twisted in an old wound. She had lived 25 years in the silence of not knowing. And now every tape, every testimony, brought her daughter's fear into sharper relief. She sat at her kitchen table late into the night, listening to the recordings again and again, whispering prayers that somehow justice might finally come. Daniel, too, found himself consumed. He replayed the voicemails until he knew every pause, every hiss of static by heart. He began carrying copies of the tapes with him, playing them for anyone who might have an ear for recognition. He grew obsessed with comparing voices, pulling old yearbooks, old VHS tapes, anything that might match. But obsession is a dangerous thing, because in the process of digging, Daniel began to uncover things about his own family he had never expected. One night, while sifting through more of Emily's belongings stored in the attic, he found a shoebox tucked beneath her old sweaters. Inside were letters, notes folded neatly, some in envelopes, some loose. They were written in a man's handwriting, and they were unsettlingly intimate. "You can't ignore me forever. I saw you last night. You didn't wave. That hurt. You're mine, Emily. You know that." The letters weren't signed. Daniel sat on the attic floor, his hands trembling as he spread them out. They weren't dated, but he could tell they had been written in the weeks leading up to her disappearance. His stomach churned as he realized what they meant. Someone had been leaving these for her, someone who believed she belonged to him. The handwriting was familiar, too familiar. It wasn't Mark's, and it wasn't Ray's. It looked eerily similar to someone else's, someone Daniel had never once considered. It looked like the handwriting of a man who had been close to their family. a man who had eaten at their dinner table, who had once helped fix the roof after a storm. A man who had known Emily since she was a child. It looked like the handwriting of their neighbor. Mr. Collins. Daniel's breath caught in his chest. Collins had lived 2 houses down in 1999. He had always been friendly, always willing to lend a hand. He was in his 40s back then, a quiet man who kept to himself, though he often stopped by to chat with their mother on the porch. Could it be? Daniel's mind raced. He remembered how Emily sometimes stiffened when Collins came around, though she always remained polite. He remembered hearing her complain once that he looked at her funny, though he hadn't thought much of it at the time, and now, holding the letters in his hands, he couldn't escape the possibility, the voice on the tape, the notes. The unknown caller, they might not have come from an ex-boyfriend or a stranger at the diner. They might have come from the man next door. Suddenly, the past 25 years seemed unbearable. If it were true, if Collins had been the one, then the family had lived beside their tormentor, eaten at the same church suppers, passed him in the grocery aisles, while Emily's fate lay in silence. Daniel knew what he had to do. He took the letters to the police, and for the first time in 25 years, there was a tangible lead. Investigators examined the handwriting. They compared it to known samples. They cross-referenced Collins's whereabouts in 1999, and slowly, the noose of suspicion began to tighten. But as they dug deeper, another truth emerged, one even more unsettling than the letters themselves, because Collins hadn't been alone. He had ties to others in town, friends, drinking buddies, men who had also frequented the diner late at night, men who might have shared his obsession, or at least turned a blind eye. And suddenly, investigators were faced with a terrifying possibility. What if Emily's disappearance hadn't been the act of one man? What if it had been more than that? The letters shook the town to its core. For years, neighbors had smiled politely at Mr. Collins as he mowed his lawn, carried groceries, or waved from his porch. He was the man who lent tools, who fixed fences, who once helped organize the church picnic. But now, every memory soured. Daniel couldn't look at the words on the page without feeling sick. "You're mine, Emily." The handwriting was undeniable. The loops, the sharp slant, the way he pressed hard into the paper, all matched. Investigators called Collins in for questioning. He was 70 now, a frail man with thinning hair and a limp that slowed his walk. To the cameras flashing outside the police station, he looked more like someone's grandfather than a predator. But when detectives placed the letters in front of him, his face twitched. "I don't know anything about those," he muttered. "Your handwriting is a match," the lead investigator said. Sliding forward the analysis, Collins shifted in his chair, eyes darting toward the mirror on the wall. Lots of people write like that. But it wasn't just the letters. Phone records from 1999, long buried in paperwork, showed that Collins's landline had made repeated calls to the Carter home in the months before Emily vanished. Most were hang-ups. Some lasted only seconds, and then came the most damning revelation. On July 3, 1999, Collins had been absent from a community gathering where he was expected. No one had noticed much at the time. People came and went freely, but looking back, his absence stood out. Confronted with these facts, Collins grew angry. "I didn't touch that girl. You want a monster? You look somewhere else," he shouted, his voice rising to a sharp pitch that startled even seasoned detectives. Yet behind his denial was something hollow, something brittle. For Emily's family, the possibility that Collins had been involved was both unbearable and strangely fitting. He had always been near, woven into the background of their lives. The idea that he had been watching Emily, waiting for her, made the mystery all the more chilling. But as investigators dug deeper, they uncovered something more disturbing than Collins alone. Collins had belonged to a small circle of men in town, older, rougher, men who gathered at the bar just outside city limits, the kind of place where the lights were dim and the jukebox never stopped. Among them were names that investigators recognized from the old case file. Men who had been questioned and released. Men who had been spotted at the diner late at night. It was there, in that bar. That pieces of conversation from 1999 resurfaced. A bartender, now retired, remembered overhearing Collins and another man arguing one night in early July. They were drinking hard, talking low, but I heard Collins say something like, "She won't listen to me. She'll see what happens." I didn't think much of it at the time. I can't stop hearing it. The possibility emerged that Emily hadn't simply been the victim of one man's obsession, but of a conspiracy of silence. Perhaps Collins had been the one who called her that night. But he might not have been alone. The FBI followed the trail, interviewing surviving members of the group. Some denied even knowing Emily. Others, when confronted with the tapes, grew visibly uncomfortable. One man broke down after hours of questioning, his hands shaking as he whispered, "We should have stopped him. God forgive us. We should have stopped him." What did he mean? The answer lay in the tapes themselves. Investigators revisited Emily's final voicemail, the one where she confessed she thought someone was following her. The audio technicians enhanced the background noise. Faintly, beneath her hurried words, was another sound, the rumble of a truck engine. Idling nearby, it matched the memory of her coworker, who recalled Emily saying she saw the same truck parked across the street. And in 1999, Collins had driven an old Ford pickup, the same one neighbors remembered seeing in his driveway long after Emily vanished. The evidence was circumstantial. There was still no body, no physical proof tying Collins or anyone else to her disappearance. At the weight of testimony, the letters, the calls, the tapes, it all pointed in one direction. For Daniel, the realization was crushing. He sat in the living room late at night, the box of tapes spread before him, and felt the years press down. He thought of all the mornings his mother had waved to Collins across the yard, all the Sundays they had sat near him at church. He thought of Emily walking past his porch, her smile forced, her pace quickening. And he wondered, had she known? Had Emily, in those final weeks, realized that the danger wasn't coming from a stranger, but from the man next door? Was that why she left? The message? Why she sounded so nervous? Was it her way of saying, if something happens, look closer? Look at him. The town, too, wrestled with the revelation. People who had once defended Collins now looked at him with suspicion. Old friends crossed the street to avoid him. His family, who had lived quietly all these years, faced questions they could not answer. But the investigation wasn't over. In late 2024, ground-penetrating radar was brought to a wooded area outside townland that Collins had once leased for hunting. The technology scanned beneath the soil, searching for signs of disturbance. And there, near a clearing, investigators found anomalies. Shapes consistent with buried remains. The dig began quietly, away from cameras. Shovels bit into the earth, layer by layer, until finally they uncovered fragments, bones, weathered by time. Fragile but human. Forensic teams worked tirelessly, gathering every fragment, every scrap of fabric, every trace that might connect to Emily. DNA testing began, though the process would take weeks. When the news reached Daniel, he sat in silence for a long time. He had imagined this moment for 25 years, the day they might finally find her. And yet, when it came, it felt like the earth had dropped out from beneath him. Finding her meant the hope was gone. The little spark he had carried all those years, that maybe she was alive. Maybe she had started a new life somewhere. That spark was extinguished. His mother wept quietly at the kitchen table, clutching a photograph of Emily taken the summer before she vanished. At least, she whispered, she's coming home. The town mourned anew. Candles were lit on porches. Old photographs resurfaced, showing Emily smiling behind the diner counter, standing with friends at the county fair, laughing in the sunlight. For many, she was no longer just the waitress who vanished. She was a symbol of innocence, stolen, of how evil can hide in plain sight. As the FBI prepared charges against Collins, the tapes were released in part to the public. People across the country listened to that chilling voice, the whisper that had haunted the Carter family for decades. True crime forums erupted with theories. Podcasts dissected every detail. And strangers who had never known Emily found themselves grieving for her. For Daniel, the tapes became something more than evidence. They were his sister's voice, her final legacy. He decided to keep them, to preserve them not as objects of horror, but as proof that Emily had spoken, that she had tried to leave behind a trail. In interviews, he often said the same thing. My sister was strong. She knew something was wrong. She left us these messages, and because of them, we finally found her. She refused to be silenced. In the end, the truth was not clean, not simple. Whether Collins acted alone or with others may never be fully known. Whether the men at that bar were complicit or merely cowards who turned away is still debated. But what became clear was that Emily had been hunted not by a stranger in the night, but by someone who lived in her world, who smiled at her family, who called himself a neighbor, and that realization carried its own kind of haunting weight. The disappearance that nobody could solve had at last been explained, not neatly, not perfectly, but enough for the Carter family to begin to lay Emily to rest. A memorial was held in the fall of 2024, 25 years after she vanished. The old diner closed for the day, its windows dark, as people gathered in the church to remember her. Hymns rose softly, mingling with the sound of weeping. Daniel stood at the pulpit, the tapes resting in a small box before him. His voice broke as he spoke. She was more than this story. She was my sister. She loved music. She loved late-night drives. She loved laughing until her stomach hurt. And she deserved so much more than what happened to her. But today, she has a voice again. And I will make sure no one ever forgets it. The town left that service changed. For years, Emily's name had been whispered like a ghost, a reminder of what had been lost. Now, her name was spoken with strength, with remembrance, with love. And though justice came late, though it came broken and incomplete, it came nonetheless. The waitress who vanished after a call from unknown in 1999 was finally found. Her story, once buried, was told. And her voice, carried on fragile cassette tapes, still speaks. Even now, if you listen closely, you can hear her.